Hello, everyone. Greetings, fellow travelers on the path, seekers of the truth. Welcome again to No Small Talk Sunday. Um, uh, you know, I I chose this subject because the subject of HRV, heart rate variability, um, because it's arising more and more and more in the news and in the marketplace. Um, and as that happens, it all gets more confusing and confusing because there's so many different devices now that make certain claims. And you can wear them on your wrists, and you can wear them on as like a ring. You can attach them to your ear. You can put something against your neck. Um, it's sort of still the holistic Wild West out there. And I have been getting more and more and more questions all the time about heart rate variability. And when as soon as I mention that my system is based on a special form of heart rate variability, the first thing that comes to mind is a Fitbit or heart math. And so I'll take that on today. I think it's time to bring clarity into the world of heart rate variability and the promise of heart rate variability and why it's the number one most powerful medical monitoring device in the world, recognized worldwide in scientific circles and modern medicine as the gold standard for assessing your current state of health and physical fitness. And its uncanny ability in the medical model to predict your death by any disease process, especially heart attack, because that's the biggest killer in the world. And I will bring my thoughts to bear on why heart attack is the biggest killer in the world. Why would that be? Why heart attack above and beyond any other form of disease process that kills people in the industrialized sort of Western style world? Now, I've been using heart rate variability since the mid 90s. Actually, the more of the latter part of the 90s. When I first came across it in the California Institute for Human Science, where I was on the faculty there. Now, CIHS was a graduate school and a research center. And as a research center, its mandate was to research the impossible to research. For instance, measuring chi energy in the meridians on a computer and with a printout graph, and how they solved that problem. Measuring the chakras, the chakra energy fields, and how they solved that problem. And for me, it's how do you measure the master control system in the brain that tells all systems what to do? The master internal physician program, the master coordinating program that monitors all of my body's systems and automatically sends signals back down to adjust their function so everybody is the most accurately aligned together, synchronized up together, harmonized together to make the system as efficient as possible and the most ecological system that you can imagine. The most work with the least amount of energy expended. Now, I have covered some of what I'm talking about today in other broadcasts in the past, mostly 2 to 3 years ago when I did the original 2 years of broadcasts from 2020 and 2021 when the pandemic first started. I began these broadcasts 1 month after the world was closed down with the worldwide pandemic. And I did 2 years of broadcasts that was 101 episodes. And then I took a year break because I had a health collapse. And now I'm back, and I think this is something like episode number 36 since I've been back. Just as a reminder, all of the things that that I have done have been a result of the things that I've discovered and stumbled on, both in brainwave entrainment and using sound waves to influence organ function and gland function and resonate vertebra and resonate cranial work, and then eventually to resonate the areas deep inside the brain that control autonomic function inside the hypothalamus. That work I've been doing now for 42 years. I was in active practice for 41 years, beginning my practice in the largest holistic health center in Virginia, Winchester, Virginia, in 1980. Most of the work that I was doing was accumulating a number of different types of holistic techniques that I went and got trained and certified in. My first interest was acupuncture. My study in the beginning was with a medical doctor, neurosurgeon, with a specialty in endocrinology, a Sanskrit scholar, and an acupuncturist who was a guru in a ashram in lower state New York, a place called Chester, New York. I was living in Warwick. I was part of a mystery school there, which I've discussed before, a mystery school around the ideas of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. When I went off to practice in Virginia, that huge clinic ended up becoming my clinic in my first year of practice because the owner of that clinic ended up in a bad investment scheme, and I bought that clinic from the bankruptcy court for a song and a dance. Me and the other partner, both of us greenhorns right out of school. It's an example of the universe saying yes to you. You step on the path that you're here for, and the doors open, the lines turn green, and inscrutable things start to happen, and pretty soon you realize you're caught up in this wave that's bigger than you. Your job at that point is to hang on to your surfboard. And so some of the stories that I will tell today I have told before in previous broadcasts, but I've never devoted a whole broadcast to the idea of heart rate variability and why it's so unimaginably important, and why it's so important in my work, and the special variety of patented HRV that I use in the techniques that I use with sound, and why that's different and why it's important. So the heart rate variability idea sort of first came to me when I was had my faculty office and my clinical office in the California Institute for Human Science. And one day there is a knock on the door, and there's an older man there, probably the same age I am now, My joke is it was probably me from some other dimension in the future. But he said, "You Dr. Thompson?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I've been seeing you in the news. I think you might be the guy who could use this device that's been kicking around in my garage." And so I'm going, "All right, what is this device?" He goes, "It's called Heart Rate Variability." This was in 1996, 1997, something like that. Heart rate variability, what is that? Well, it sort of measures an ECG signal of the heart and does some fancy math and shows you the sympathetic parasympathetic function. And I'm going, whoa, wait a second, time out. I mean, the autonomic nervous system, that's the master control system that tells all systems what to do. You've got some computer program that can view on a computer screen the master control system that tells all systems in the body what to do. Of course I'm interested. How much do you want for this thing? Oh, I'm not willing. I'm not looking to sell it. I just been kicking around. I'm using it. You know, somebody who could use it. Could you use it? And I said, well, sure, I could use it. Well, then here, take that. So he hands me this heart rate variability device, and he turns around and walks away. I never see this guy again. That's where this whole thing started with heart rate variability for me. And up to that point, I was using advanced forms of applied kinesiology, which uses a stress response in the autonomic nervous system, played out through muscle strength in the body. So if I can stress a certain part of your body out that has a problem and make that problem slightly worse, then your autonomic is going to have a stress response to that, and that's going to make all your muscles weak. Now, the process of how that happens is complex, and that's worthy of another broadcast. I have covered that also in some other broadcasts, particularly a 3-part series I did 2 years ago on esoteric anatomy, 3-part series. Also 2 years ago, I did a 3-part series on the chakras, the anatomy and physiology of the chakras, that are linked into spinal cord levels, linked into each with a gland. The autonomic nervous system fits in there, each one associated with a meridian and a meridian point. The whole science and neurophysiology of the chakras. So I was looking for some kind of scientific device that I could use to do my testing instead of the AK testing, the applied kinesiology muscle testing, because although that's a really good and useful tool in a clinical setting for a professional who really knows what they're doing, not an amateur who learns just enough to get themselves in trouble and sabotage the test unconsciously. But my overall plan was to take, was to move, excuse me, my overall plan was to move a scientific-based, verifiable, holistic technique into the mainstream and challenge the mainstream medical system in the marketplace, because the health care system that we currently have is not a healthcare system. It's a symptom management system that has nothing to do with addressing the cause of whatever problems we might have. So there are two things that modern medicine is really good at. Extremely powerful chemical concoctions that can artificially make the body do different things, like reduce pain, reduce inflammation, change blood pressure, manage blood sugar. I mean, there's very powerful chemicals that can really control your body in spite of what your body is trying to do. On the other hand, there is a well-developed system for emergency health care. When you have been hit by a truck and you're dying and there's a heroic effort to save your life, this is where modern medicine shines. And in ICU, when you are in intensive care units to save your life. And in the most advanced technological imaging systems in all of human history. MRI machines, fMRI machines, EEG devices, heart rate variability devices, SQUID machines, MEG devices, magnetic imaging of the brain, QEEG, brain mapping computers. It's unprecedented what we can see inside the body and what's going on in the body in certain conditions. On the other hand, over here, research all over the world has used those same super sophisticated devices to look inside the brain and into the nervous system to find out what's going on in extreme states of self-awareness and expanded consciousness in high states of meditation. That is part of the work of biotuning. Actually, that's the main focus of biotuning, is expanding consciousness and awakening humanity. But you have to start where people are. And where people are is they have problems. They have health problems. And they're seeking answers to those health problems. And that's the interface that usually began with me, is interfacing with people who had problems. I had unique approaches that nobody else seemed to have had. Some of that was my mentor in Virginia, who I bought that clinic from, the most amazing healer I ever met, who taught me biomagnetic fields and their effect on organs and glands and function. It was a pretty dynamic relationship that showed me a lot of tricks that I have in my bag that nobody else seems to know about. So my sort of hopes and prayers for some kind of technology that could replace the muscle testing, so I would have technological device that could move this sound work that I was doing into the mainstream, was this guy showing up and handing it to me and then walking away. So the first thing to realize is that the device that he gave me was a device called the Nerve Express, one of many heart rate variability devices on the market, the medical version. All of this is based on the fact that throughout the world right now, modern medicine and scientific circles all agree that stress is indeed the ultimate cause of disease. Not actually stress, it's how effective is your autonomic nervous system in handling the stresses coming at you from inside your body and out the outside world. The balance of the autonomic nervous system is critically important in all kinds of things, but at its base, your health, and at its extreme, in your ability to reach your center and wake yourself up to the deepest part of yourself. The autonomic nervous system has to be in a certain level of balance for that really to take place in its full expression. So it's not just me that believes that stress is the ultimate cause of disease, although that was becoming my conclusion in 40 years of practice as the years rolled by. And particularly once I got this heart rate variability device, it became obvious that imbalances in the autonomic nervous system really was the core problem going on. And we'll flesh that out so you can see what I'm talking about. Stress, the ultimate cause of disease. Stress is the ultimate cause of illness and mortality. Stress is not a disease. Stress causes illness and disease. 90% of what sends people to their physician is stress-related illness. Millions of people leave the physician's office with prescriptions for antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and every other kind of pharmaceutical chemical prescription that only tries to treat the symptoms, but do not treat the root cause. And then there are the long list of pharmaceutical negative side effects on the body and the brain. Because if you've got these imbalances and you're not treating the imbalances, but you're treating the symptoms that result from those imbalances and effectively silence them, the core cause continues to get worse and worse and worse. More pills, more cover-up. I'm sitting on my couch watching my favorite movie, and the smoke alarm goes off. And so they prescribe earmuffs. Those aren't quite good enough because I can still hear it, so they bring the surgery team in and remove the batteries from the smoke alarm. Now the fire has worked its way into the living room and it's burning up the couch. And I'm getting burns on my arms, so they prescribe cortisone cream. In essence, the system is insane. And it's profit-driven from, trillion-dollar industry pharmaceutical companies who, like any other corporation in the world, has an edict in place: profits at all costs, no matter who gets hurt. There's an acceptable number of people who can die from the side effects of these medications that is acceptable to the FDA. And that's what the FDA approval process is all about. You have an acceptable amount of side effects and permanent harm that can happen to the body, and even death, that is a percentage calculation on some algorithm that is acceptable or not. And, in an individual, when you take a pill, there's no more bell curves. Bell curves just are only applicable to large groups of people. So any individual walks into your office, there are no such thing as bell curves. We have no idea where you are on the bell curve. Are you one of the 80% of the people that, that respond this way? Or are you one of the 20% of people who have a completely different crazy response that nobody's, expecting? It's a crapshoot. Stress effects on the body. Stress affects all systems of the body, including the musculoskeletal, respiratory, cardiovascular, endocrine, gastrointestinal, nervous, and reproductive systems. Our bodies are well equipped to handle stress in small doses, but when that stress becomes long-term or chronic, it can have serious effects on the body. Progress in neurobiology, uncertainty and stress, why it causes diseases and how it is mastered by the brain. Yeah, I mean, this is just, this is PubMed articles. These are peer-reviewed journals. Stress, as time went on, this heart rate variability device that I got was the typical classic medical version of professional standard HRV, which requires an EKG signal. You have to put some kind of patches to pick up the electrical activity. That particular one had a band that went around your chest and measured your heart information from your chest. The ones that I use now have wristbands that are electrical impedance pads. But the snapshot system of heart rate variability in the modern medical system is taking 3 minutes of measurements and then stops, crunches numbers, and pops up screens for you to see that shows sympathetic, parasympathetic function and a bunch of other stuff. That's good enough for me to have done a pre and post measurement of my patients who I was using muscle testing to find out what frequencies to use, but that wasn't good for me. I mean, it's good to have an objective measurement to show that what I'm doing actually has true worth, the objective measurement worth. But I was looking for HRV to be able to replace muscle testing to find out what frequency to use in the first place. And in order to have that, I would have to have a real-time system that is not a snapshot, but a movie that doesn't stop. So I could see the sympathetic, parasympathetic live on the screen over time. That's what I was looking for. In modern medicine, this whole concept that stress causes disease is referred to as allostatic load. Allostatic load refers to how intact is your stress handling system versus how many stresses are coming at you from the external, from the external world or from your internal world. Imbalances in biochemistry, poor nutrition, working too hard, worrying about your bills, bankruptcy, divorce, all of that. External stresses is job and injuries and pollution and things like that, heartbreak. So if allostatic load is actually referring to what's the capacity and what level of balance is your autonomic nervous system to handle the stresses coming at you, and how effectively is your autonomic nervous system able to adapt to increasing levels of stress in your life that might come and then go and come and go, or that continually get more and more and more as your life goes on, that you create a new set point and a new set point and a new set point to handle larger and larger and larger levels of stress. Sort of like the frog in the gradually heating water until it comes to a boil. There comes a point, and everybody's different because we've all got different biology and different DNA of how our system is put together. But on a bell curve, there's a point where the stress is coming at you or more than your system can possibly handle. And when that takes place, now we have a problem. Now we have a negative allostatic load. And what takes place at that moment is the sympathetic nervous system, the stress handling system, the fight or flight part of the autonomic nervous system, takes off and gets stuck in the on position. Sympathetic override all the time. You've got now a permanent fight or flight response in place. And I will get into the depths of how disastrous that is and what it actually means from a standpoint of physiology. Allostatic load is defined as the cost of chronic exposure to elevated or fluctuating endocrine or neuro responses resulting from chronic or repeated challenges that the individual experiences as stressful. Now, that's a stupid mouthful for something very simple. Allostatic load is measuring how intact is your ability to handle the stresses coming at you. Right? If you can handle it, then fine, you're healthy. If you can't handle it, then you're not healthy anymore. The body is designed to handle stress. And allostatic load is the set point of how muscled up you get to handle the stresses coming at you. But over here, related, post-traumatic stress disorder, amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, corticotrophin releasing hormones, cortisol, stress hormones, all these different kind of diseases and things pop up as soon as allostatic load goes into the negative. So we've got all kinds of different stresses: social, environmental, work, poverty, social isolation, physiological stresses, metabolic problems, inflammation, body clock problems, sleep problems, major life trauma events, bankruptcy, death, divorce, near-death experiences, death of a loved one. All of these factors coming into the body. There's individual differences in vulnerability, how your genes are put together, and what kind of life experiences you've had in the past that might have messed you up as a child. Behavioral responses where you can adapt or not adapt, but I believe that adaptation and maladaptation are directly related to allostatic load. And then you have these physiological responses, and all of this stuff taken together is you can either successfully adapt to it or you can't. And if you can't, that is the cause of disease. Any disease you can think of, any disease you can possibly imagine or look up in a book or do a Google search for, its ultimate cause is lack of balance in the autonomic nervous system and ability to handle the stresses. Here's more PubMed articles. Allostatic load is a marker of cumulative biological risk. MacArthur studies of successful aging. So, if your autonomic nervous system and your allostatic load is negative, if you are not up to the task of handling the stresses, and you're running a fight or flight response all the time, you age faster and you die quicker. So there's a certain amount of age reversal and longevity associated with managing stress at the autonomic level. That's why it's so astounding to be able to use high-tech methods for measuring what's going on in there, and in this case using sound waves in order to balance it out, and then train it up to be balanced at higher and higher strength levels. So it becomes very difficult to stress you out because your system has been exercised on the inside, which is something that nobody has ever done before. There's never been a system for doing that. Meditation and breath control can help do that. But not a technological method for inputting a way to help. Allostatic load is a predictor of all cause and cause-specific mortality. Allostatic load is a predictor of any cause of death or a specific cause in the general population. That's pretty remarkable of a statement to say in a peer-reviewed journal, that allostatic load is a predictor of any cause of mortality, any cause of death, just by analyzing the balance of what's happening in the heart rate variability readout of what the autonomic nervous system is doing. And it all starts right here. Right here in this little pyramid of Cheops zone in the center of your brain, right there, is where the autonomic nervous system governs everything in your body on automatic without you knowing it. When I was studying anatomy and physiology, which means I had to memorize all the muscles and all the joints and all the bones and all the nerves and the wiring diagram of the brain and the spinal cord and biochemistry and all the rest. I mean, it was such a titanic amount of information that I thought I must have been a fool to think I could do it. How I managed to do it was because I'm an artist. I went to art school. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I illustrated it. I drew it. I drew the brain. I drew the wiring diagram. I drew the muscles. I drew the bones. I drew the joints. And in drawing those, the hand-eye coordination burned pathways. I had it. By the time I finished illustrating it, it was burned in my brain. I was making straight A's in the most difficult subjects in school. And then I sold those drawings to fellow students in booklets, study guides, and put myself partially through school as a medical illustrator. Then I got hired by the school to illustrate manuals for classrooms. This is the golden zone in your brain. One thing that I learned in going to school was, wait a second, time out. How come I have to hire all these people and spend all this money and buy all these books to learn what all this is when I grew it myself in the first place? And one of the things that I saw in studying the anatomy and physiology of how the system was put together is that who I am up here in my rational thinking mind, who I identify with a name and a job description and all the rest, who I think I am, is completely separated from big mind, who runs the system on automatic. I don't have a clue what's going on down here. I know it when I don't feel good, but I don't know exactly what that means or what's causing it or what to do about it. I mean, so I drag myself to some doctor who studied what to do about it. I have to trust that person because I don't know. But when I'm studying anatomy and physiology, I'm realizing that nothing in the body, nothing in how the body is put together is not on purpose, that everything is on purpose. Everything is for a highly specific reason. The system is tight. The body has had hundreds of thousands of years of biological evolution to get it right, to go down all the blind alleys and make all the mistakes you could ever make and say, let's not do it that way, let's do it this way instead. So bang, here we've got a system that's tight, that's balanced, that's symbiotic, that is highly ecological, that gets double, triple, quadruple duty out of every single structure. And that means that the fact that I don't have a clue what's going on down here is on purpose. That the monkey mind is not supposed to be working, it's not supposed to be managing the big machine. I've got other stuff to do up here. This mind down here has its job to do. I have my job to do, and I'm not supposed to be doing this job. Therefore, I have to go to school and pay a lot of money and memorize and learn and illustrate in order to find out what I grew in the first place, right? It's really based on a deeper central idea, the big holistic idea that there is a biological organic intelligence that knows how to grow my body out of two cells and differentiate the tissues and make them all run on automatic without me thinking about it. Who I think I am up here, that I think this is me, is incorrect. That who I think I am and all the apparatuses of my brain and my mind and my reasoning powers and my cognitive consciousness in the world is a tool that big mind grew for a specific purpose, to be in this world and to survive in this world. But in order to survive in my body and run the body so it survives, that's another brain. That's the deep brain. That's the part of me that knows how to grow my body out of two cells. And someplace deep down inside of that is the consciousness that knows how to read the blueprint. And deeper than that is the consciousness that made the blueprint in the first place. And as we've discussed before in previous live streams, now we're talking about the deepest zone of the quantum field. Because ultimately, my body is 99.9% space, and so is everything around me here. 99.9% space. There's, made of compounds, chemical compounds. Those are made of atoms combined together. Atoms are protons, electrons, and neutrons in the periodic table. The arrangement of them in the periodic table is based on music theory, octaves, harmonics, overtones. The structure of an atom is based on music theory. The shells that the electrons, those are all standing waves based on harmonic patterns. Break the atoms apart, and now you're in the quantum field. Newtonian physics on this side of the wall, and quantum physics on the other side of the wall of the periodic table. And now you're going to break protons, electrons, and neutrons open, and they're made of smaller particles. But when you look at those particles, they're not particles at all. They're resonant fields, standing wave fields of their own. And when you go and start looking inside of them, you see other particles that are also not solid particles at all. They're fields of vibrational standing waves. And when you get down to the very bottom, at the bottom of the quantum field, there's nothing there except energy resonating in standing wave patterns. Now, when we go back to the ancient texts from India, they talk about it precisely and exactly the same thing. We don't know what's down there resonating. We don't know what's making those standing waves. The substance is too fine for our instrumentation to measure. The ancient texts say that it's consciousness itself, and the resonant standing waves is an idea. What's the idea? This is the idea. And who am I? I'm an idea. I am one idea out of that field. So at the core basis of me and you and any individual thing is a highly specific resonant field at the quantum field level, where we have what's called quantum foam, where things are popping in and out of existence in a super high energy state that you get fooled into thinking is a vacuum, but it's not a vacuum. It's a heavily populated substance that's boiling with titanic forces of activity that form these vibrational fields that make standing wave patterns. And the standing wave patterns all stack together nicely mathematically together according to music theory and make chords, harmonious frequency relationships. And as we zoom back from that quantum field, they stack and stack and stack and stack and form hadrons and leptons and protons and atoms and people. At my core is a resonant field, a frequency. And that frequency spins out harmonics and overtones like all frequencies do in nature. Everything is rich with harmonics and overtones, which gives it its timbre. Why a cello string sounds like a cello and not a flute is because the harmonic overtone signature that fleshes it out and gives it its timbre. My voice sounds like me because of the resonant characteristics of the tissue mass of my vocal cords. And it's not just in my vocal cords, it's in every tissue of my body. That same harmonic overtone patterns that I can do in a recording studio of a spectrograph of my voice and all the harmonics and overtones, same ones that are in all my body. It's just that I can blow wind across my vocal cords and do a trace there. So, yes, sound waves have a profound effect on my consciousness and my health and my balance in my system. If I can find the right frequency that is closely aligned with the fundamental resonant frequency that consciousness used in the first place from a quantum field to erect this manifestation of standing waves, which are all tuned to harmonic overtones and ratios to its fundamental frequency of my consciousness, my individuality, what makes me unique in the universe, what's me as a hyperdimensional puzzle piece that's unique shape with unique talents that is looking for a job that only I can fill. That's at its root what mantra was all about. An actual physical tone that you sing and resonate and chant with your own vocal cords and resonate your body back in tune to your fundamental resonance. Now, back in India, you would clothe that in a Sanskrit syllable derived from your Vedic astrology chart that would show your syllable archetype, the archetype personality of the perfect you, resonating at a certain frequency, clothed with that Sanskrit syllable shape of the packet of sound waves that would point you to your highest possible archetype. That was what the mantra was all about. But the masters have all retired and they've moved away from us. They've withdrawn. So we can no longer go to the master in the cave who can take one look at me and know what my frequency is and sing it to me, and I can sing it back until I memorize it. And now I go to my cave and I chant that frequency right down to the root of my consciousness. I resonate myself like a wine glass to the root of my own personal quantum connection to the universal field. Since the masters are gone, now we have to rely on our technology. And that's the real promise of this concept of how we're using a real-time heart rate variability system to find out what that frequency is. But here's where it all starts in neurophysiology. And if we were to zoom into this cool little area here and blow it up, that's the hypothalamus, that zone right there. And this is what it looks like on the inside. There's a number of little organelles in here, and they've all got fancy names. Hanging directly down from that is the pituitary gland, the anterior posterior lobe, where the two master forces of the body come together. The neurological lobe and the biochemical lobe. Hardwired right up into the hypothalamus, where this controls what's going on down here from the autonomic nervous system. Now, this little organelle that's right here, the anterior hypothalamic nucleus, this one right here, that is the origin of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that controls the whole system. That controls the autonomic system. This one here, the posterior hypothalamic nucleus, that one is the sympathetic origin, sympathetic nervous system origin. So these two, the anterior hypothalamus and the posterior hypothalamus, that is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system at their origin. The back up here, here's the hypothalamus. Hanging down is the pituitary gland. This controls all the glands in the body. The sympathetic, parasympathetic have direct wiring that comes down into the brainstem, exits out at the brainstem as the vagus nerve, and goes to all the organs. The sympathetic goes down the center of the spinal cord and exits out at the nerve roots, and eventually goes to the same organs after a series of way stations. The parasympathetic controls the system. There's the pituitary, right here is the pineal gland. Here's a closer look. Now we can see the same anterior hypothalamic nucleus and the posterior hypothalamic nucleus. Here we can see a blow up that shows what each one of these little organelles does. Now, this zone in the brain, this triangular zone, is of supreme importance. All the organelles in this zone are processing extremely high-level important control systems for my basic survival, regulating water balance and different chemicals. That the destruction or the functional imbalance of any of these causes significant survival problems in my system. Here's the anterior nucleus, stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Here's the posterior nucleus, stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. So with all this talk of the vagus nerve stimulation devices, with the vagus nerve that comes down the neck out into the body, its origin is right here. And it's this origin that I believe that we are influencing with a highly tuned sound wave, where this is like a wine glass, and we are controlling the absolute seat of control that eventually becomes the vagus nerve, right in the center of the brain. So once again, here's the hypothalamus, here's the pituitary gland, and this structure that's wrapping around here is the hippocampus and the amygdala, which is the emotional control physical apparatus. This is the emotional body right here. It stores past emotional memories. It stores past emotional traumas. The amygdala is the seat of emotional reactivity. And all of this is hardwired, bang, right into the autonomic system. Hardwired. That means that my emotions and past emotional memories have direct hardwired access to the autonomic system that controls all of the systems in my body. That means that emotional traumas can have direct organic effects of how my organs and glands function, how my biochemistry is responsive to my emotional states, to emotional traumas. Here's a master diagram of the sympathetic parasympathetic system. So once again, in the center of the brain in the hypothalamus, the nerve comes down and exits as the 10th cranial nerve here, the vagus nerve. And this 9th cranial nerve here, called the glossopharyngeal nerve, is also important, as we will see. In my research, I spent $1,000 on neurosurgical texts in order to research out the possibility that the 9th cranial nerve may be a second neuron of control of the sympathetic nervous system response in the autonomic nervous system. And in reality, I did find branches that extend from the 9th cranial nerve into the 10th cranial nerve, back and forth, where these two nerves are influencing each other's function. We'll get into that in a minute when we see the expanded real-time heart rate variability system that we have a patent on that shows this kind of information. But you can see that the vagus nerve, once it comes out, goes directly right into every single organ in the body. And the second half of the parasympathetic branch is the sacral plexus, where these nerves come out and go straight to different organs in the body. So these more have to do with sex organs in the lower part of the large intestine and the rectum. And even though in this diagram it doesn't show that this and these are connected, they are connected There are branches that connect both of these. Really, in reality, the parasympathetic nervous system comes out from the top brainstem and the bottom sacral plexus, and the sympathetic comes from the middle. So parasympathetic top and bottom, sympathetic middle. That means that the sympathetic neuron in the hypothalamus comes down the center of the spinal cord and exits out through the thoracic and upper lumbar nerve roots into this structure called the sympathetic chain. So these go into the sympathetic chain synapse there, and only after that synapse do they come out to another what's called postganglionic plexus. You can see them here. It's a postganglionic nerve network plexus that that they branch in, go into. It's another way station. And only after coming out of this way station do they finally get to the same organs that the parasympathetic goes to directly. This has a series of lag points. That's part of the reason why the parasympathetic drives the system, because it has instantaneous access and the sympathetic does not. So when we talk about a sympathetic on fight or flight response that's instantaneous, how does that happen? Because if the sympathetic nervous system has to go through all these lag points to get there, how come it's the sympathetic system that's causing the stress response? And it's not. The parasympathetic drives the system. So when I have a fight or flight response, the parasympathetic nervous system turns off and the sympathetic turns on by default, because they're sort of like a seesaw. It's sort of an oversimplified example, but in that way, when one is on, the other one's mostly off. Parasympathetic turns off, sympathetic turns on by default instantaneously, and causes adrenals to fire and a whole bunch of energy to be pulled from all my systems into my muscle to fight for my life. We actually have a third branch of the autonomic nervous system that is usually never ever discussed. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic and the enteric. The enteric branch goes to my gut. And so that is part of a parasympathetic response. When the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant, energy is pulled out of all of my system and put into my gut and my elimination system. And the enteric branch of the autonomic nervous system is activated, and it starts its own thing all by itself. And it is causing certain activity in the small and large intestine, mostly the small intestine, with digestive enzymes interacting with all of the population, 25,000 different varieties of weird bacteria with different DNA that populate the gut, the biome. But in this network of how the autonomic functions, there's the parasympathetic state, which is rest, relax, digest, eliminate toxins. Parasympathetic dominance is more associated with alpha wave function, less with beta function, more with internal mental focus, like holographic focus. It slows the heart rate and the respiratory rate and the blood pressure. Sympathetic, on the other hand, is more associated with beta waves, which is us out here talking right now. The heart rate, respiration, blood pressure go up. Balance of these two systems together, where neither one of them is on, right? If parasympathetic is not on, drawing the energy from my system to digest my food, or I'm not fighting for my life, pulling all the energy into my muscle to fight for my life, that when both of these are not active, they should be zeroed out into neutral. And this neutral state is what's called homeostasis. Complete zeroed out balance of the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous systems balanced out. So now we can start to get a picture of what does neurological, biological health look like. If I was a perfectly healthy specimen, then I should be living all the time in this zone of zero stress in the system. I'm not fighting for my life. I'm not using my energy to digest. Both of those are off. All of that energy is now in the big reservoir, and the internal physician program can now come online and start working on an inevitable list of things that have to do with my survival to keep me alive and keep me healthy. Signals are going to be coming from all my systems, organs and glands and biochemistry and meridians and all the rest to be analyzed, send signals back down to adjust their function, fine-tune the whole thing so it's a perfect orchestra making a perfect chord, send signals down to rebuild certain tissues. That's a perfectly healthy person. Living at zero stress, right? I'm in my safe place. I have no concern for my survival. I feel now that I can open my doors and windows and be free to be vulnerable. And that is a prerequisite for healing, and a prerequisite for deep levels of meditation, and a prerequisite for me waking up to the deepest part of myself. This amazing ability of the system to reach a balance of zero between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which balances all of my emotional centers and my biochemical centers and my energy centers, where everything coalesces, gets hyper efficient. So the concept of heart rate variability can measure this on a computer screen. So let's get into that. What heart rate variability is really measuring is the space between each heartbeat, the boom, 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 boom. This is derived from the electrical event that takes place to make my heart muscle contract. The initiating factor comes from the autonomic nervous system down through the vagus nerve into what's called the atrioventricular node of the heart, electrical node. Signal comes down, hits that node. A spread of electrical influence goes across the heart muscle, and the heart muscle contracts in the presence of that electrical field sweeping across it. Medical level heart rate variability is measuring an ECG signal. It's measuring that electrical activity, not the heart muscle. Heart muscle will contract when that electrical influence goes across the heart muscle. You know it's contracting, unless there's a disease process there where it can't respond. That's heart disease. But the raw electrical signal straight from the autonomic nervous system that makes the heart muscle contract is what the high level, professional level heart rate variability is measuring. And you can only measure that with an ECG signal. Patches on your chest or on your wrists, picking up the electrical activity that makes the heart muscle contract. That's the gold standard of HRV. It gives a good, sharp picture of these what's called R to R intervals in the QRST complex, QRST complex. All of these bumps are showing different valves in the heart contracting or relaxing. That's how you read one of these. But heart rate variability is measuring the space between each heartbeat, right, in milliseconds. And as you can see, no two are exactly the same. There's a bit of variation between them, and the more variation, the more different the spacing between each one, the more healthy you are. And the first time I heard this, I thought, that can't be right. It should be more perfection. It should be more exactly the same. Perfect. And once again, it's a good lesson to realize that what small mind who's disconnected has as an idea of perfection has nothing to do at all with what the universe has as a definition of perfection. So from big mind, who designed this body, its idea of perfection is more variability, and this idea of perfection is more perfectly aligned. We see that kind of mistake happening all the time from small mind interpreting what it thinks perfection should look like and the universe not delivering it. So here we are with the PQRST complex of the EKG signal. So we can see that as the vagus nerve comes down to this node and starts the electrical sweep across the heart, the atriums, these two atriums at the top, where the blood first comes in, are the first ones to contract. And when they do, there's a bump of that contraction. These, when they contract, squeeze the blood down into the ventricles. And now the ventricle muscles contract, and that's this one here, the QRST, the big bump. And that's the one we're measuring in HRV. The ventricular contraction of the blood from these chambers, which go out through the aorta right into the arteries of your body. So it comes in to here, squeezes down to here, squeezes out of here into the body, and then has a recovery phase, which is this bump. So by analyzing the shape of these, we can see if you've got heart disease, if there's something wrong with this bump or something wrong with this bump or something wrong with this, you can see immediately you've got a heart problem, and you can hear it through a stethoscope. I spent 3 months studying stethoscope sounds of normal and diseased heartbeats so that I could interpret what kind of heart disease you've got just by hearing what the bump, 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 bump sounds like. And learning how to read these chart graphs of heart information. But when I went to school, HRV was in its infancy and nobody had even heard of it yet. I really need to go and do a Google search to find out when HRV was first invented and put on the market. I don't think it was even on the market when I was in school. I graduated in 1980. So here we have the barometric receptors in the carotid artery, which are supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, the 9th cranial nerve I mentioned just a little bit ago, and the vagus nerve, which controls the aortic arch from the heart. But these carotid arteries are here on either side of the neck, and they're wrapped around with the barometric receptor nerves that sense pressure, so that when I stand up and gravity pulls the blood out of my head, those barometric receptors signal the pressure drop, kick a sympathetic on, kick my adrenals, and raise my blood pressure just enough to equalize gravity. That's called gravity stress. That's normal function. My autonomic will create a new set point at this higher, a little bit of higher blood pressure as the new normal set point for when I'm upright. And we're going to use that to test the balance of your autonomic nervous system in a test called the Raglan test, which used to have been done, and how I learned it, with a blood pressure cuff, a testing for adrenal insufficiency. Now I've got HRV and a live HRV. I can look at the autonomic itself and see if it's balanced properly. So, the more variability, the better. That's called high HRV. And the more metronome-like and the less variability is low HRV, and this becomes the super accurate prediction of death by any disease process by noticing how bad this is becoming. And in the gold standard in modern medicine, this is all done with ECG measuring. There's two forms of HRV. One is ECG, electrical measuring, and the other one is PPG, which most people are actually familiar with, right? The little clip that goes on your finger, or a Fitbit on your wrist, or an Oura ring, or a little thing, ear clip with heart math. Those are layman's versions of heart rate variability, and they are measuring what's happened after the electrical event has taken place and causes the heart muscle to contract. These are measuring heart muscle contraction, squeezing the blood out into the arteries, which makes the arteries expand and contract with each heartbeat, all the way out into the microstructural capillary beds of your fingertip, where the finger clip might be, or the pulse in your earlobe, right, or the pulse in your wrist. PPG is measuring a plethysmograph. It's measuring expansion contraction of the artery to get a rough picture of the QRST complex. All it really needs to get is the R to R interval, the space between each ventricular contraction, which we have to measure in milliseconds. So for, a sort of a down and dirty, easy, not 100% exact picture of the beat-to-beat space, we can calculate high HRV versus low HRV in a fairly accurate way, good enough for me to be jogging and have a look at what's going on, or analyze my current state of health in a general sense. The importance of HRV, right? Low HRV versus high HRV is what the whole industry is based on, with the Fitbit and the Oura Ring and heart math and biofeedback systems. The medical version of HRV is worldwide, has standards set forth by the European Task Force of Cardiology, the North American Society of Pacing, and Electrophysiology. The membership in this task force means that you abide by the rules that have been set forth by these big governing bodies, so everybody's on the same page, and that HRV systems have to meet these requirements to be recognized for research or for use in clinical practice. Not necessary for the layman's version with a Fitbit, an Oura Ring, or any kind of system that's using an ear clip. Not necessary for them to toe the lines if it's a commercial enterprise and it's not medical. Deep dive into the most important metric for health, recognized worldwide, HRV. Even the wristband, even your smartwatch. Well, now you're going to see what are these smartwatches and the ear clip and the Oura Ring actually measuring. Heart rate variability is unimaginably complex. There's all kinds of different ways of looking at the data. This one, the SDNN, the standard deviation of the NN intervals, and RMSSD, the root square of successive R to R intervals. It gets pretty complex, but basically what's happening is, according to the European Task Force standards, you have to take at least 190 heartbeats minimum. 190 heartbeats is about 3 minutes. So all these spaces of heartbeats in milliseconds, we're gonna measure 190 of those, and then we're gonna stop. This is how the modern medical systems work. It stops. It crunches numbers. It adds all those values up, all 190 of those little micro measurements, adds them all up, comes up with a number, and divides by 190. And what do you get? The mean space between a heartbeat, between an R and an R. That mean space is the standard that all the rest of them are measured against. It's the bell curve average space of your heartbeats, right? So every other one after that is measured against this standard, the standard deviation of the mean. This is the mean heartbeat. Standard deviation is you can accept certain deviations from this standard as still being within normal. But if the if the space gets too big or too small from this standard, then that's outside the range and it's looked upon as not good, right? Low HRV. Never mind all the rest of these. This is deep stuff. If you go back and you read this guidelines, the HRV guidelines from the European Task Force, this is dense stuff. This is 50 pages of the densest stuff you ever saw of every possible aspect of how the heart works and how the autonomic nervous system works. It's mind-blowing stuff, good stuff. If you're a nerd like me, and a complete and deep explanation of each one of these values and how all the different ways that you can look at the data. So the RMSSD versus the SDNN. RMSSD versus the SDNM. There are two types of algorithm devices used to display the end result of your HRV score. The SDNN simply records your heart rate, how many beats per minute, takes an average throughout the day, usually in a 24-hour period, and displays your heart rate variability result in the form of milliseconds. This is done by Apple and Fitbit because it's easy, but not as accurate as the next method. The RMSSD actually records the time difference between beats in real time, a more complex and accurate formula that is used by companies like Whoop and Komodo, the AIO Smart Sleeve, and other devices like that that you may not have even heard of, because everybody is using this. HeartMath uses this. ECG versus optical sensors. So there's another one, the optical sensor, the one, the finger clip thing with the little laser, right? Some of you have a smartphone and you can put your finger over a thing and it will do the same doodad, right? That's the optical sensor. Now that we've talked about the algorithm, let's talk about the input method. Where is the device acquiring the heart signal from? Almost all companies use optical sensors because of its versatility and ability to show other information. However, it's much less accurate than an electrocardiogram, which is the gold standard in medicine that we use. The AIO sleeve is the only company that extracts HRV data from an ECG signal. To get an idea of the difference, a standard optical sensor uses 50 samples per second, whereas ECG uses a minimum of 300 samples per second. The system we use uses twice that much. This is how often the sensor feeds data to your smartphone. This is quite significant and is the reason all professionals prefer to use ECG. Like us, the system we have a patent on. Gold standard of medicine worldwide. Now, I get so many questions about, as soon as I mention heart rate variability, everybody asks me, is that like HeartMath? Now, I remember HeartMath way back from the good old days. I mean, I was part of the original crowd in the 80s that were the new rising sort of tech hackers of consciousness, the arising of binaural beats and brainwave entrainment, the arising of light and sound machines that entrain through light pulses, the arising of a number of different devices that were similar like that, that could change consciousness with tech. And back in those days, HeartMath was in its infancy, run by a guy named Doc Childra. Now, Doc Childra was not a doc. Doc was in parentheses. Doc Childra, everybody referred to him as Doc. But he was the first person in that realm to be using heart rate variability as a feedback device. So the big differences going on between HeartMath and what we're doing is HeartMath uses a little clip on your ear. They used to use the finger clip. None of that matters. Wherever you're collecting that signal from is PPG, and it's the SSD measure of expansion contraction of the arterioles. Now, why that is not up to the medical standard is because you have so many variabilities and so many factors affecting the beat-to-beat interspace when you do it that way. You've got any anomalies in any of the valves in the heart or any anomalies in any of the muscles in the heart are going to affect that signal. Any anomalies in any of the arteries between the heart and the finger clip is going to make a difference, right? The elasticity of the arterial walls and how effectively they're transmitting what's happening in the heart. The blood that's going through them is going to create resistance. So if you have a high cholesterol count, you're going to have thick blood that is going to change this picture. So there's a lot of factors going on in the health of cardiovascular system that make this less and less accurate from a good sharp picture of what's going on with the electrical depolarization that makes the heart muscle contract, that's giving you a readout of who's generating that signal, sympathetic, parasympathetic, in a state of balance in the autonomic nervous system. We're trying to use all those to get a picture of what's going on up here. So the more sharp that picture can be, the better this is going to be of what we're seeing. In addition, HeartMath is using the HRV measurement as information in a biofeedback system where sort of the onus is on you to manage your emotional state. So it's well known that when I'm agitated and I'm under anxiety and stress, that is reflected in the electrical activity of my heart. And when I'm in a good mood, a good emotional state, an emotional state of appreciation or gratitude or empathy, then everything cools out and becomes much more nice to look at. It's basically agitation versus calmness, sympathetic versus parasympathetic dominance. So if I can learn a methodology to police my emotions and to notice when I'm under stress and try to change my emotions to a non-stress state like gratitude or empathy, then that will be reflected in the HRV readout that HeartMath is giving me. So it means that the HRV use with HeartMath is not influencing your system. It's giving a readout of what you were able to achieve by managing your emotional state. The problem, though, is most of us have a lot of difficulty managing our emotional state. And in my opinion, the fact that you are experiencing anxiety that is messing your signal is a sign that there is something wrong inside that needs to be fixed. And externally managing my emotions in order to influence how the autonomic can go from an agitated to a relaxed state is fine, but I don't see how that is going to make a permanent change in why it's agitated in the first place. Like any biofeedback system, using some kind of a biofeedback technique, like either EEG, that's neurofeedback, or biofeedback, which is reading stress in the system. The old biofeedback used to be pulse, heart rate, galvanic skin response, the things that were used in a lie detector test, as a matter of fact. So now you're getting a readout of where you're at, and you're going to try to change something to change it. And it's going to give you feedback of whether you're being successful or not. For instance, neurofeedback. I did 2 years of clinical work with a neurofeedback practitioner who is next door to me, who used to be a student of mine at CIHS. We were specifically, well, I was extremely interested in being exposed to a high-end QEEG brain mapping computer system, so I could really see stuff that I'd never been able to see before. But we were experimenting with the use of brainwave entrainment combined with neurofeedback to see if we could get a better response. And how that system worked was you would come in for an intake exam that was expensive, $1,300. This is back in late 90s, early 2000s. You had to go through 40 sessions at $350 each, 3 times a week. Let's say we have an ADD kid who's stuck in theta. They can't do beta function, external focus. They're stuck in theta. And when you put the cap on and you look at their brain pattern, you can see that there's planes of communication that aren't quite working. And you see that in general, when you give them a task to focus on, they can't do that. The brainwaves stay in theta and they don't rise up through alpha into beta function where external focus needs to take place. So then they make a computer program that makes a plane fly. You're supposed to make the plane fly with your brainwaves. And the plane has an ocean and clouds, and you're supposed to make it fly in the middle and not crash or go up in the clouds. And they've programmed the plane to only fly with beta. And it's kind of like, excuse me, but that's what they can't do. I mean, that's the very thing they can't do is do beta. So how do you expect them to make the plane fly if they don't know what to do? So that was frustrating as hell. I mean, these kids are frustrated. They don't want to be there anyway. But now they really don't want to be there because it's fail for 15 sessions, right? 3, 6, 9, 12. That's a month of fail. Fail and fail and fail. Can't make the plane fly. So my approach was, okay, let's put headphones on and have binaural beats, 2 sine waves, binaural beats. And we're gonna tune them in a way that the pulsing between is 5 hertz theta, where the kid is stuck. They're stuck at 5 hertz theta. They can't make it move. I'm going to entrain your brain waves to 5 hertz theta. I'm going to train your brain to what it's already doing, instant brain entrainment. Now we have something called the frequency following response in EEG. If I dial it up from 5.0 to 5.1, your brainwaves follow. 5.2, they follow. 5.3, they follow. 5.4, they follow. 5.5, they follow. 5.6, they can't go there. It's too much. The brain doesn't have that much elasticity right now. But we just moved you from 5.0 to 5.5 in 1 session. And now we're going to make the plane fly at 5.5, an achievable goal that you have to stretch for, but that's how learning works. And when they find out that they can make the plane fly, those kids are jumping up and down and whooping and hollering, and they can hardly wait to come back for the next session. And the next session, we start at 5.5. and dial it up 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 6.0, 6.1, too much. Make the plane fly at 6.0. Third session, we start at 6.0, and all of a sudden, this whole thing is completely transformed. And in the process, I realized it's a better system than neurofeedback. Here's part of my idea is when I was studying anatomy and physiology, and I realized that this part doesn't know what the hell's going on under the hood, and it's on purpose. Then all of a sudden I started wondering, well, wait a second, what about neurofeedback or biofeedback? That's exactly what they're doing. They're feeding signals on a screen that small mind can see how the big system is functioning so that I can make modifications in how this system is functioning. I just broke the rule that the body put in place on purpose. The small mind is not supposed to be running the big mind system. Real neurofeedback and real biofeedback, in my opinion, should keep this continually out of the loop, and it should feed the information directly back into the autonomic system and not come out of that system into this system, which is not supposed to be involved. So it's my big problem with neurofeedback and biofeedback. That, I mean, I guess the extreme example would be if I had to manage my heartbeat with this system, right? 60 times a minute, I would have to pay attention to initiate the next heartbeat. So I wouldn't be able to do anything else. How am I supposed to do anything else where, like, every minute I have to make my next heartbeat and remember to do that and link that with my respiration in some coordinated effort with small mind? That's crazy. The fact that I've got an imbalance that's causing me to seek biofeedback or neurofeedback in the first place means there's an imbalance that needs to be fixed. Under the hood needs to be fixed. This part is not supposed to be trying to fix that, as far as I'm concerned. Frequency. The other major classification for HRV measurements is frequency. That's what we use. As opposed to time domain, which creates a score from the average time between beats. Frequency measurements categorized based on the wave structure of our heart rhythm. And the wave structure of the heart rhythm is in hertz. It's vibrational frequencies like sound waves. Ever heard of brain waves? It's the same thing, just for your heart. Neural activity can be classified into brainwave frequencies that all mean different things. The lowest frequency brainwaves are called delta and are associated with sleep. Higher frequency waves are associated with higher brain activity functions. With HRV, we have ultra low, very low, low, and high frequency waves in hertz, by the way. In my opinion, frequency measurements are more confusing than time domain measurements, but they have been getting much more popular in recent years, and they do offer unique information. This frequency bandwidths in the heart. Now, this is what this looks like. Ultra low frequency, which you can only get with a 24-hour monitor on your wrist. Very low frequency, and high frequency. Low frequency is sympathetic function, high frequency is parasympathetic function. Ultra low frequency, nobody is measuring because nobody has got a medical level of ECG, HRV strapped to somebody for 24 hours a day, which is what's required to pick up ultra low frequency. That is where our company is moving towards to do that as our next phase. Down here is LF-HF, or the relationship between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. The ratio of low frequency to high frequency is the core of our system, because the relationship between sympathetic and parasympathetic, when they're zeroed out at homeostasis, is perfect balance in the system, and allostatic load is at its best. It's the prerequisite for deepest perfect balance and health, and in perfect balance and for meditation. This is what our system looks like. Remember, we're measuring the beat between each one, and we're measuring frequency bandwidths in the heart. And the frequency bandwidths in the heart, although you can't see this picture very well, these are the frequencies in hertz. And the blue bandwidth here is sympathetic function. The green bandwidth is parasympathetic function. The red bandwidth is very low frequency function. And each of these has a meaning. Sympathetic, parasympathetic is obvious. This red zone, the very low frequency zone, that has to do with the barometric receptors in your carotid artery, which are innervated by the glossopharyngeal nerve, the 9th cranial nerve. And the red zone also stands for any kind of hormone that would affect autonomic function, stress hormones, pleasure hormones, and subconscious ruminations, which is usually what that means. I'm deep in my unconscious mind dealing with something when this value is very high. But the relationship between sympathetic and parasympathetic is of ultra importance to what we're trying to measure, and that's displayed here. Sympathetic in blue, parasympathetic in green, and right there is what we're looking for. Zero stress in the system. Homeostasis, perfect balance. Right there. So when someone comes in and we're going to hook you up to these ECG sensors where a positive, negative ground have to go through the heart to complete the circuit, and we hook you up upright where gravity is pulling the blood out of my head, baroreceptors are signaling to kick my adrenals to raise the blood pressure to a new set point. Then I lay you down, no more gravity stress, and we watch what happens, right? We should see sympathetic tone when you first lay down. It should collapse down to 0 in 3 minutes if you're healthy. It's rare to find somebody who has a normal system. Everybody's running a hot sympathetic system of some kind. That means after 3 minutes, after 5 minutes, after 10 minutes, it's still on, it's not moving. I'm locked in a fight or flight response all the time. That means the internal physician program is not engaged. Nobody's minding the store. All of my organs and glands and biochemistry and meridians and chi and everything else is drifting. Nobody's managing them. Nobody's synchronizing them, keeping them in tune. They're drifting. And alarms are going off. That's symptoms. Right? The medical system is looking for pathology. That's all their tests are looking for pathology. I'm not pathological yet, so I'm invisible to that system. Also, all the energy is pulled out of my gut, elimination system, immune system, higher brain centers. I can't digest my food properly. I can't eliminate toxins properly. My immune system's messed up. I've got brain fog. I can't sleep. I'm running a vigilance program. My body's not going to let me get to the deepest stage of sleep where physical recuperation takes place. I'm screwed. That is the cause of disease. And the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. The fix is to bring the system back to this. So now that we've got this dominance in place, I've created a sound sweep of all frequencies from 50 to 200 hertz that are going to play through your body through a special sound share. And we're going to watch this display to watch this stress response collapse down to 0 in the presence of this sound sweep. We can watch the response of your autonomic nervous system to the sound waves as they get closer and closer until it hits this point. Then the computer will grab what frequency made that happen, display it for us, and I know if I play that note, this will happen. I can hook you up during a session. I can watch this happening. Now I feel comfortable to give it to you as a soundtrack to use at home every day. Every day you listen. this happens. Every day this happens, it gets stronger to happen. We're taking it to a gym for the autonomic nervous system. We've made discoveries with this system. When I first beta tested this, I thought that if I make this happen with a sound wave, if I play that sound wave, I'm going to get a straight line of 0. But the only straight lines in nature is death. What the body does is some unique system that we discovered where sympathetic and parasympathetic skate back and forth across this balance point in an oscillation. And that oscillation pattern is what homeostasis looks like in a living subject. We also discovered that there's 3 nested oscillations modulating within each other. So we've got sympathetic, parasympathetic skating back across this 0 balance point, homeostasis. But then we have a barely crossing over amplitude, very barely crossing over for a few beats, then a larger crossing over for a few beats, larger amplitude. Then it goes back to small, then it goes back to large, then it goes back to small. That's the second oscillation buried within the first one. And they're not skating back and forth across a straight line. It's a sine wave line, because the autonomic nervous system power centers are themselves breathing energy. Energy is expanding, energy is contracting in the autonomic nervous system itself, reflected in my respiratory cycle and my heart rate cycle and all the other cycles that are nested together through my bioclocks. Everything expands and contracts in nature. Everything is breathing, including the energy levels of my autonomic nervous system itself. So now we see these patterns of small, large, crisscrossing back, going in a sine wave. 3 nested oscillations. 3 nested oscillations is what you see in all critically balanced systems in nature. The emergence of waves within waves within waves. So this small crisscrossing oscillation, small amplitude, larger amplitude, back and forth, and a sine wave down and up and down and up is what we're looking for in a perfectly balanced system. This is the sound chair. The sound chair actually was the curve of this chair is a NASA technology transfer. They took astronauts floating in space, and in a weightless condition, the natural tension of your tendons and ligaments and muscles float you in this perfect seated position. And that seated position is what's in the chair. That's this curve. When you leave the chair back so the knees and the head are the same horizontal plane, that's the 0 stress point for the cardiovascular system. And that's a position you're in when you're blasting off into space to absorb all these G forces. We have a patented design on the chair where the chair is split down the middle here. Right-left stereo separation like the headphones. It's critical. If I've got binaural beats and 3D processing, phase relationships of 3D, and I've got binaural beats with one tone and one tone making the pulse that I'm in training to, right? When I've got headphones, it forces synchronicity of the hemispheres as well. If I have the sound chair divided right-left, then the right half of my body has one frequency of the binaural beat, and this one has the other frequency. It forces the neurons of vibration sense to do the same thing as the headphones are doing to my cortex. This by default. Hypersynchronizing the system, and the body loves it. When you get hypersynchronized and hyper-efficient at 0 stress, the body pumps out feel-good hormones, serotonin and dopamine and endorphins. It's a scientifically tailored feel-good experience because the system is rewarding you for balancing it out and achieving homeostasis. you're giving a gift to your own heart and autonomic nervous system, helping it to achieve a perfect state of balance, which it's constantly striving for. And now you've got a scientific methodology for making that happen and taking it to the gym and exercising it up until you're Arnold Schwarzenegger on the inside, and it takes huge amounts of stress to cause any perturbation in your attitude. And at its core, that's what we're up to here. Even though the present format of our mind link together, like we're about to do, where we have headphones and everybody's brainwaves are synchronized up between the hemispheres, and everybody's brainwaves are synchronized up to exactly the same brain state. So we become one mind. That one mind of our general collective unconscious new mind that we're creating has power. There's power in numbers. We have the power to access and open doorways to higher levels of information and higher levels of influence in the quantum field. The possibility of changing reality itself from a quantum standpoint. And that's what we're about to do. So, headphones, please. And here we go. Thank you all for being here with me. It's my great joy and honor to be with you all, and to link our fields together in a conscious entanglement, so to speak. I'm going to leave the chat thing open for another half hour. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you next Sunday.